Okay. So, last week was the first week that we had many of the kids staying in the service for the sermon, and many of those kids filled out these cool sheets that they have. And they're really, really neat. But what's even neater is Ramona gave them to me so that I could see them and read them. And I got to tell you, I haven't smiled that big in a long time. They're really cool. So what's really great is there's lots of opportunity for doodling in the margins, because when there's a talking head up here just going like this for 35 minutes last week or whatever it was, kids tend to doodle a little bit. And so some of the doodles that come out of that are inspired, right? Also, there's a section on there, I don't know, kids, if you've seen this, but there's a section on your sheet where you actually get to draw something that impacted you. And a few of them, it was me. And I got to say, even the one where I have a triangle head, it was still like, Anyway, I think it's a really great idea. Adults, I don't know if we have extra print-offs each week, but maybe that's something that we could all do, is start taking notes. I know I have notes every week, but it doesn't help me. I don't get any candy. But one of the things that was mentioned on one of those sheets is, why are we talking about movies? And I have kind of mentioned this most weeks, but I just want to make sure that I'm making sense to everybody. So the reason we're doing this, talking about movies and connecting them with Jesus or with the Bible, is that Jesus did this same kind of thing all the time. Now, most of you know this because, I have talked about this before. But this is the kind of thing that Jesus did. He talked about stuff that people knew about. So in Jesus' day, he talked about farming. He talked about going and getting sheep that had wandered off, because we all know that sheep, right? He talked about all kinds of things, like the guy who built his house on sand, which we don't know why he did it, but we all know who it was, right? So they knew these stories. They were things that were familiar to them. They were, like in our day, pop culture, the kind of stuff that everybody kind of knew about. And so here we are in today's day. They didn't have movies back then, but movies are one of those things that kind of most people go see. Most people can talk about a movie that they liked, right? And so what I like to do is I like to bring up movies and show how easy it is for us to actually take pretty much any movie and talk about God, using the movie as a way to get there. Does that all make sense? All right, clear as mud, here we go. So I'm going to start by showing you just the trailer for the film. And the reason I'm only showing the trailer is because this movie was fantastic. And I don't want to spoil it for you because it wasn't huge. Okay? All that being said, if we got the power on, I'm going to do this. Has anybody seen it? A couple. Anybody else? Anybody over here? Oh, you guys saw it in the back? So that's the thing. The movie, it wasn't a big blockbuster. But this movie really made me think. It was one of those films that it touches on a lot of stuff. Some of it's a little mature in its theme, but I got to say, I normally don't do Christian films, like specifically because that's easy, right? Because it's already about God, it's already about Jesus, whatever. I normally don't do those. I'll pick things like Batman or the Avengers or whatever, because how do you connect that with the Bible, right? And it's a lot more fun, I think, to do those things. But this film really hit me. Like, it surprised me when I watched it because, as a pastor, I've read the Bible a bunch of times, and I know most of the stories. I've had a lot of conversations about faith with people, and I'm not often surprised. This movie surprised me because it had me thinking, so many times throughout the story, wondering about the issues that they were talking about, actually unpacking what was just dialogue from a film. So, if you haven't seen it, it's worth looking for. One of the things that this movie did for me was it actually caused me to ask the question, what is it that God has to do to get your attention? Because here's this guy he goes to interview. Somebody's called up. They're willing to do an interview for the paper and this and that. And the kid's just returned back from Afghanistan. He's been there for a long time. He's come back home. So he's trying to get another kickstart back on home turf. Some guy calls, and he's sent to do the interview. He meets him in a park. He talks to the guy, asks him for his name, and the guy says, God. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody called me and asked me to meet them in a park, and I went to the park and I sat down with them and I asked them who they were, and they said, God, I would say, yeah, we're done. Right? Because it's ridiculous. And of course, that's the position that he has. Well, this is ridiculous. But he has to do the interview. He's paid to do it, so he does it. And the film starts to open. So, again, I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to say anything. I don't want to spoil it for you because it is actually a really good story. But as I started thinking about this stuff, it occurred to me, man, there are all kinds of times in my life when I'm not really all that aware of what God is doing. And the truth is that God never stops working in my life, just as he never stops working in yours. He's always doing something. The truth is that the journey that we are on when we place our faith in Jesus Christ is we begin a journey that the scriptures refer to as sanctification, being sanctified. It's this process of being transformed bit by bit, changed into the likeness of Jesus. So that we look not in our physical appearance, but in our spiritual appearance, in our attitudes, in our thoughts, our way, our manner. We become like Jesus. So, if when we look in the mirror, we don't actually look, talk metaphorical mirror, when we look into ourselves, if we don't look like Jesus, then there's still work he's doing, right? Does that make sense? If we're not at the goal, then we are still on the journey, yes? Right. So if he's always at work in my life, if he's always working at transforming me, if there's always something more, and I'm not seeing God at work, is it him or is it me? So these are some of the questions that this film made me ask. And I keep asking myself of these things. You see, the truth is that when I saw this film, I started thinking about an old joke. And I actually told this joke here before. I don't know if you remember. But a long time ago, I talked about this joke, probably the first month I was here, I think, because I love this joke. So there's a big flood. Okay? It's a big flood. One of those ones, like, I don't know if it was like a tsunami that came, but once the water flooded out the bottom floor of all the houses, it just kept rising. So we had this one family, they're in their house, and there's water in their living room. Their basement is full, and the water's just going up and up and up. So they go upstairs in their house, and they're upstairs, and they're looking out the windows, and they can see that the water's still coming. And this guy comes by in a rowboat, and he comes by the window, and he's like, guys, the flood's here. You guys should get in the boat with me, and I'll take you to safety. And they said, no, it's okay. We love the Lord, and we know that he's going to take care of us. He will rescue us. And he's like, okay, whatever, you guys are crazy. And he left. And so the water keeps going up, and eventually even the top floor of the house is filling up. So they climb out onto the roof of their house. And they're sitting on the roof of the house, and a powerboat comes by, sees them up on the house. And this guy's great big boat, and he comes by, zipping by, stops at the house, and he says, hey, you guys are in big trouble. Can't you see that this is a flood? Jump in the boat, I'll take you to safety. And they said, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But we love the Lord. We know that he's going to rescue us, so we're good. And he goes, yeah, okay, you're crazy. And he leaves. And so they stay there on the road, and it's going up and up, and now their feet are barely touching. They're basically just treading water now. The kids definitely are, and they're at risk of dying, and they're sitting there, and then suddenly they see a helicopter come over, and they drop a ladder down, and the guy's screaming from up above. He said, climb up the ladder, and we'll rescue you. And they said, no, it's okay. We love the Lord. We're going to be okay. He's going to rescue us. And they're like, you're nuts, and they take off. Of course, the family drowns. And they go to heaven, and they get to heaven, and they're disappointed. And they go up to the Lord, and they said, Lord, like, we trusted you. You promised to rescue us. We knew you were going to rescue us, and yet you didn't rescue us. And God looks at them and says, what, are you kidding? I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. So, okay. All right. It's good, right? Yeah. So I can see into the future. All of you are going to tell somebody that joke this week, right? No. All right. It's not prophetic. I think it's easy for us to get caught up in the circumstances of our lives so much that we forget to look beyond what we can see with our eyes. Because we know that the physical world and the spiritual world are different. In the spiritual world is not something that we see with our eyeballs necessarily. We get so preoccupied sometimes with our challenges or even sometimes the good things of our lives, excitements. When I first got married with Tracy and we got to go away on a beautiful honeymoon, that's all I could think about when I was on that honeymoon. You know what I'm saying? But that's the trouble with living in this world, is sometimes things are so great or they feel so bad that that's kind of all we can see. We get caught up by the things in this life so much so that we miss God speaking into it. As you probably guessed, there's a story in the Bible that kind of touches on this. Something I want to share with you this morning, and so I thought we would do that. This is Luke chapter 24. It's verses 13 to 35, and it says this. It says, "Now, that same day, two guys, right, are going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. They're talking about the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? They talked and they discussed these things with each other. Jesus himself came up and walked alongside them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked, 'What are you discussing together as you walk along?' They stood still with their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, 'Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days?' 'What things?' he asked. 'About Jesus of Nazareth,' they replied. 'He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one that was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and they found it just as the women had said, but they did not see, but him they did not see. He said to them, 'How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?' And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he was going further. But they urged him strongly, 'Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over.' So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread and gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, 'Why were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?' They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together, and saying, 'It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon.' Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread." In the movie The Interview with God, An Interview with God, even though the reporter is told right up front that the person he's interviewing is God, he doesn't see it. He's got all kinds of other ideas in his head about what's actually going on, but that he's actually talking with God is not one of them. In the end, it takes quite a bit for him to actually turn and see. To my everlasting shame, I've lived with the same thing in my life, many times in fact. Far too many times in my life, I've missed things that God was doing in my life or saying to me because I was so focused on my situation, my own reality, if you will, that I just couldn't see him. Have you ever been there? You ever been in that place where you were so wrapped up with the things going on that were right in front of you that you couldn't really see much else? Because I sure have. And in the midst of all of that and my journey beyond that, I've learned a few things. And one of those things is that we have to have faith for God's promises. This, in fact, is almost an antidote to being in that place where we're missing all the things that are happening around us and in our lives that God is a part of. In the story of the two men on the road to Emmaus, we're told that they were kept from seeing Jesus. What I find interesting about that is that many people interpret this to mean that Jesus somehow kept them from seeing, like he was wearing a disguise or supernaturally covered himself somehow so that they couldn't actually recognize him. And I understand all the theology behind that, but it's interesting if you go back to the original text. Because in the original text, it literally translates as, "But the eyes of them were holden so as not to know him." It's placed on the individuals, the two men. It just means that they were not able to recognize him. It doesn't infer anything else. And I think that's because, like we sometimes do, they were so wrapped up in their circumstances. They're spinning on all the stuff that's just happened, so much so that they couldn't see anything else. I think they couldn't see Jesus because they weren't looking for Jesus. I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I know that not long after Tracy first started wearing glasses, there was something going on. There was commotion, so I started paying attention, and she's rummaging around the room. She's, you know when you just know somebody's frustrated? Like she wasn't whining or anything, but she was making noises and bustling around, and I could just tell, I could feel it on her, something's wrong. And so after a little while of watching her turn the entire house upside down, I'm like, honey, what's going on? She's like, I can't find my glasses, like this. And I said, they're right there. And they were sitting on her head, right? And the reason I'm telling that story is because I've done the same thing. And it's pretty cool because as I look around the room, there's a bunch of you going, yeah, right? Because it happens. In fact, I have often said that if you really want to hide something from me, put it right in front of me because I'm probably not going to see it, right? It's sometimes as true today as it was for the very first time I said it, because in my flesh, I kind of have this natural tendency to live in the moment. And that means that when things get challenging, or if I'm not being intentional about looking for more, it's hard for me to see anything else than what's right in front of me. I have to do it on purpose, you see. And that's why I've learned to have faith in God's promises. See, one of God's promises, I don't know if you know this, but one of God's promises is that if we will look for him with all of our heart, we will find him. That's a promise of God. That's a pretty powerful thing. He says that if we look for him, he says, in our translation, he says, you will seek me and find me. So if we're looking for him with all of our hearts, we will find him. Now, I want to confess this morning that this is something I haven't always done. In truth, I still sometimes miss the mark, but I know that God has promised us that if I look for him with everything that I am, if I look for him with my whole heart, I'm going to find him. And it's funny how that reminder actually turns my mind, turns my focus, and I start seeing a whole lot more. When I've leaned on that promise and have been looking for him with all my heart, I've seen him in places I never would have seen him before. I saw him at work in the moment when my daughter Rachel came looking for me one day just because she wanted to give me a great big hug. You ever had somebody do that for you? My Rachel was especially like this when she was little. She used to go, huggy, and I would pick her up. She'd just wrap herself around me. It was the most amazing thing ever. Anyway, one day Rachel came looking for me to give me a hug for no reason whatsoever, and I picked her up and she hugged me like that, and she had no idea the kind of horrible, awful, emotionally painful day I was having. You know what I'm saying? I saw God at work in the day that a stranger here, when we lived here, a stranger bought my wife her new hearing aids that we could not afford and had no way of getting. I see him at work sometimes now in conversations that I'm having, long before breakthrough ever comes or healing ever happens. Sometimes I see him everywhere. Every conversation, every place I go, sitting in restaurants, out with my kids at the beach, just looking around with the eyes to see and a heart to find God, I see him at work. Are you worrying this morning about, making ends meet? Because God has promised you provision. Have you been concerned about there being too much bearing down on your life? Because God has promised you rest for your soul. Have you been worried about what God thinks of you because you've just done some things in your life? God has promised forgiveness to anyone who asks for it with a willingness to try his way. When we learn to have faith for the things that he has promised, we start to actually see the places where he's been working in our lives all along. But this also reminds me of another thing that I learned, and that is to recognize the God moments. And I know you've heard this before because I've actually closed a number of service with this very same encouragement or reminder to look for those God moments. This is because of how easy it is to go through our daily routine and miss the fact that God is right there, alive and active and working in our lives and in us. Both in the movie, An Interview with God, and in our lives, in the scriptures of the two men on the road to Emmaus, in fact, it's really only after the fact, after some big event or revelation, that they can turn around and see that Jesus was there the whole time. It's that big reveal that gets their attention. But in the aftermath, they realize that he was there the whole time. It's been true in my life so many times it's ridiculous. And sometimes we need to be intentional. We have to do it on purpose to look for those God moments and recognize where he's at work in our lives. Because the truth is, he is always at work in our lives. And if we let our circumstances get the better of us, they will easily distract us into thinking about other things. I'm going to give you an example. Now, I told this story, I think, in maybe like the second sermon I ever preached here 4 years ago. But at the risk of being redundant, I'm going to tell the story again because it really is the perfect example of this very thing. When back in 2005, right after Crystal was born, I took a job for the summer as the director for Circle Square Ranch in Snyder Mountain in New Brunswick. And when we were there, we were kind of partway into the summer, I think it was June or July maybe. Suddenly I started to get in pain. Now, little history of Aaron. I've had, about 20 kidney stones. So, yeah, I know, they're not good. But I've had so many of them that when I get a kidney stone, I know what it is, right? Like, it's not one of those things I need a whole lot of testing or doctors to tell me. I always get it confirmed. But when I get a kidney stone, I know the pain. I know what my body does. I've had so many of them that, here I am at work, and I go, oh, right? As soon as the pain hits, I know. So I had Tracy take me to we had a little, it was a small hospital. They called it a hospital. It was a glorified clinic in Sussex, New Brunswick. And so I go into this place, and I'm explaining. The doctor finally comes in, and I explain to him that I'm pretty positive I've got a kidney stone. And it was weird because before we even started talking with water, I could feel like he was really impatient with me, seemed angry with me. I hadn't done anything, hadn't talked to him. And he was treating me in a very ugly way. So I'm trying to explain to him. He's cutting me off. He's telling me, fine, I will send you for an ultrasound and stuff. And at that point, I'd had so many of these things that I also knew that often the ultrasound is no good. They wind up sending me for CT because they can't see them right. And I tried to mention that to him, and he actually slammed his pen down on his little clipboard thing that he had and started yelling at me. And I was like, okay, all right, whatever, we'll do what you worry. He was telling me, don't tell me how to do my job. And I was like, anyway. So I went, and I had the ultrasound, and I come back, and I sitting in the room, and he makes me wait a really long time, comes back in, and says, there's nothing wrong with you, and very angrily. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure. I'm bleeding. I'm in incredible pain. I can barely stand. And like I know the symptoms. And it hasn't stopped. Like I'm still in that state. And he said, no, you're fine. There's nothing wrong. I've looked at the ultrasound. There's nothing there. And I didn't dare bring up CT idea because I got yelled at last time. So I just went, and he turns around and picks out his prescription pad. He goes, I'm going to write you a prescription for antibiotics. And I said, well, why are you writing me a prescription if there's nothing wrong with me? To be fair, I think I was trying to pick a fight because I wasn't as grace-filled as I can be now. Anyway, he got very angry with me when I said that, of course, and we went through this whole bantering back and forth because he's prescribing me something. I cannot be out in the sun, and I work on a ranch. So when he was done, I explained that to him. He wrote me a new one, threw it at me, and walked out the room. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm not getting any help, and I went back to the ranch. A week or more later, I'm not passing it, and it is so bad I can barely walk. And so I get Tracy to drive me to the St. John Regional Hospital. It's more than an hour away from where we were. And I walked in, and triage took them about 10 seconds to get on a phone, call an orderly, have them rush me to CT while Tracy does the intake, because I walked in, she said, you looked like you were going to die. And I went, okay. They sent me up. I was upstairs in the hospital, had my CT, was back in the room waiting for the doctor, all within about 20 minutes. It was amazing. It was the fastest hospital experience of my life. I waited in that room for, another 10, 15 before a doctor came in to see me. It was like first-rate service. The guy walked in, and he said, Mr. Birch, I've got good news, and I've got bad news for you. Which would you like first? And I said, well, obviously, give me the bad news. And he said, you have the biggest kidney stone I've ever seen. You are going to have surgery. And he explained to me that because of how late it was, I could try and wait and see if they could fit me in that night. But they could definitely get me in the morning. It was up to me. If I wanted to go home and come back, I said, I'm here. I'll just wait. And so he said, great, I'll go get your schedule. And he started out the room. I said, hold on. What's the good news? And he burst out laughing for a second, got his composure, and he looked at me and he said, your uterus has been removed. And naturally I said, what? And he said, well, the doctor at the Sussex clinic wasn't looking at your CT, saved the previous, or not CT, but ultrasound, saved the previous ultrasound. Someone was in for a checkup after a hysterectomy, and they had saved that ultrasound to my name. So all of that yelling, all that whatever, he was... Right? Okay. I was instantly angry. Instantly. I had been in agonizing pain for a week. I should have been in the hospital a week earlier. I should have had some help. I should have. That's all I could think of. See where I'm going? I'm at the hospital now. Finally, they're going to deal with it. Okay. They rushed me in. They did get me into surgery that night. I finished the surgery. I come out. I wake up. And I'm all groggy, and the nurse says, hold on. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to go get your doctor. The doctor says, when he arrives, the doctor says, this is absolutely incredible. I said, what? He said, so you have cancer. And it was in your bladder, and reasonably undetectable. Said probably given the cancer, probably if we hadn't done this surgery, we wouldn't have seen it until we were giving you, you've got this long to live. He said, if before it got jammed where it was, if they had done a procedure back then, apparently there's like a sound thing they can do to break it up. It was too emergent now to do it. They had to do the surgery because they had to deal with it right away. But he said at the time there was like ultrasonic thing that they can do to break up the stone. He said if they had done that, they never would have saw it. And suddenly I realized that this doctor back in Sussex, the one that treated me the way he did, if he had found the problem then and I had been ultrasonic thing, they wouldn't have done the surgery, wouldn't have found the cancer, and I'd be dead. I was so concerned about I'm being wronged, I'm in pain, me. I was so concerned about what was happening with me that I could not see that God was doing something in my life. Do you see that? Because the truth is that even to this very day, circumstance happens, and I get so caught up in the circumstance that it's all I can think of, and I don't see God at work in those things. Romans 1:20 said, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." You know, he's everywhere. Even the creation around us is meant to remind us of him, that he's there. Not just that he's present, but that he's active in our lives. He's out there. He's everywhere. And when we really look for him, we really will see him. Maybe you're the kind of person that's always looking for God in your life. Maybe you're the kind of person that always notices those little things that he does along the way as we journey in this life. But if you haven't been seeing him, I want to encourage you again, look for those God moments, especially when things are going sideways, because he does promise that he will be there. The last thing I want to talk to you about this morning is really just kind of an encouragement, and it is that we should know in all of these things that we have something exciting to share. Experiencing God changes everything. Experiencing God changes everything. It's why the interviewer in the movie finally sees God. It's what got me in the midst of my life to see God. And it's the same for millions around the world. And that's because experiencing God changes you. And it should motivate us to want the same for others. What we see from the two guys on the road to Emmaus is that when their eyes are opened at the end of that story, when their eyes are opened and they can see that it was Jesus all along, they go nuts. They get so excited because now they have their own personal experience to share. They rush back to Jerusalem because they've got to tell people. And in fact, when they come in contact with the other disciples, they're talking to them and they're like, no, this happened here too. And they're like, it's incredible. And they get to share the story. Suddenly they're excited, and they're moved into action. And it's because they had their own story to tell. But that's what happens when we're touched by Jesus. When our lives are changed, when there's an encounter with God, suddenly we have a story to tell. You understand that being a witness for Jesus isn't just about sharing what the Bible says. It's about your story too. I mean, people connect with what they can relate to. The disciples told people what they witnessed, what they saw, what they experienced. And they also knew the scriptures. And we should be doing the same. We should share the story of Jesus that's in the Bible, but also the story of Jesus that's in here, in the heart. When I first began sharing my faith with people when I was a young Christian, and even when we went away to Bible college, in fact, I was still so green with this whole sharing my faith thing. I used to try to convince people about Jesus. And what I mean by that is I kind of approached it like it was like I was on one side of a debate. Right? I'm going in with all my facts and I got all my scriptures lined up, and I'm going to like, right? I'm going to talk at them until they go, yes. But that was kind of what I thought. I mean, that's what I always saw. And so I wasn't necessarily sharing anything. I was going in with, well, the Bible says this, and the Bible says that, and the Bible says this. All it took was for somebody to go, well, I don't believe in the Bible. And I was like, oh. Yeah, but the Bible says, yeah. It doesn't work. It didn't work for me. I used to try to convince people. But when I instead started telling people about the exciting ways that my life had been changed, the way my life had been touched and transformed by Jesus, and I used the scriptures to show them where the foundation was, well, that was a whole lot different. So because people see that, they hear it, they respond to that, and they get excited about it. They want to hear more about it. They want to have their lives touched too. Everybody does. I've had conversations with some of the most miserable people you could ever meet, and they want their lives to be better. All of them. You know, the Lord continues even to this day to change my life and touch my life. Jesus turned my heart away from self-destruction. He freed me from the bondage of drug addiction and alcoholism. He took a street kid, made him a man, gave him a wife, blessed them both with children. I never would have guessed that back here. And it's because of the transformation that he did to my life and in me. He took all the broken things in me and he turned them into a weapon for the kingdom of God. After he came into my life, no longer would my pain haunt me or hurt others, but instead, it would be used to bring healing, restoration to the people of all walks of life. And like I said, he continues to touch my life. He continues to touch yours. He changes my heart. He changes yours. He blesses me and he nurtures me. He chooses me again every day. You know, God chooses you. God chooses you. I hope you're hearing that. Right now in this moment, whatever you were 5 minutes ago, God needs you to know. He chooses you. Every one of you chooses you, loves you. He calls you a son. He calls you a daughter. You're his. Tracy sent me this totally random thought, but Tracy sent me a little video this morning. It's one of those videos that I had to respond, how could you do this to me first thing Sunday morning? It was a video clip from a wedding. And I got to get through this. And the father, camera's facing the father is speaking to his about-to-be son-in-law right at the altar, right before it's all done. And he's got his hand around his son-in-law, and he says, if something happens and you don't have love in your heart for my daughter anymore, please don't hurt her. Bring her back to me. That is the heart of fathers, because that's the heart of our Father. Don't hurt them. Bring them back to me. God needs you to know that you're His, that He chooses you, that He loves you, that He desires to be close to you, that He's at work in your life and He's right there now all the time. You know how many times I look at my own kids and I shrug and I'm like, I wish they knew all the things that I do for them, right? Because even in relationships on this plane, we miss that all the time, don't we? Friends, parents, children, we miss stuff like that. And the same is true in our relationship with God. Everyone can have Him. God blows my mind every day by touching my life in ways that change me again and again and again. And everyone, every single human being in the world can have that. Because He wants that. Everyone. The truth is, it's really just a matter of being open to receiving from Him. It's really just a matter of letting Him in. Maybe that means just something as simple as letting someone pray for you or letting go of something in your life that's keeping you from being closer to Him. Maybe all you need to do is just for a moment stop everything, quiet yourself, and say, Lord, I need you. He's listening. Whatever it is, He wants to transform your life in ways that you never even imagined. And I've got a pretty big imagination. Can I just say that? And He continues to surprise me even to this day. And when He does show up, you need to tell people. Tell everybody. As soon as the guys on the road to Emmaus got what had happened to them, the Bible tells us they immediately got up, they go to Jerusalem, and they told all kinds of people what had happened. It's the same for us today. When we encounter Jesus in a way that changes us, we have an exciting story to tell. When people hear of lives being changed, whatever it is that's being changed, they listen and they want to hear more about the incredible things God has done in your life. They'll respond. Remember, you have something exciting to share with others. So the challenge this week, homework. And all the kids went, oh, I just want the candy. Here's your homework. Just have faith in the promises of God. Because God means what He says. Recognize those God moments. Look for them. Be watching for them. And when He shows up, whatever He does, tell everybody you can about your Father in heaven. I invite the worship team to come.